Hello there. Get ready for some cozy bedtime magic with bird fairy tales, edited by Andrew Lang. These stories are like sweet dreams told by our feathered friends, so lie back, relax, and let the soothing tales take you to a land of bedtime wonders. Good night and enjoy the journey with our birdie tales.
The story of Caliph Stork. Caliph Chassid of Baghdad was resting comfortably on his divan one fine afternoon. He was smoking a long pipe, and from time to time he sipped a little coffee which a slave handed to him. And after each sip he stroked his long beard with an air of enjoyment. In short, anyone could see that the Caliph was in an excellent humor. This was, in fact, the best time of day in which to approach him, for just now he was pretty sure to be both affable and in good spirits. And for this reason, the Grand Vizier Mansur always chose this hour in which to pay his daily visit. He arrived as usual this afternoon, but contrary to his usual custom, with an anxious face. The Caliph withdrew his pipe for a moment from his lips and asked, "Why do you look so anxious, Grand Vizier?" The Grand Vizier crossed his arms on his breast and bent low before his master, as answered, "Oh, my lord, whether my countenance be anxious or not, I know not, but down below, in the court of the palace, is a peddler with such beautiful things that I cannot help feeling annoyed at having so little money to spare." The Caliph, who had wished for some time past to give his Grand Vizier a present, ordered his black slave to bring the peddler before him at once. The slave soon returned, followed by the peddler, a short, stout man, with a swarthy face, and dressed in very ragged clothes. He carried a box containing all manner of ware strings of pearls, rings, richly mounted pistols, goblets, and combs. The Caliph and his vizier inspected everything, and the Caliph chose some handsome pistols for himself and Mansur, and a jeweled comb for the vizier's wife. Just as the peddler was about to close his box, the Caliph noticed a small drawer and asked if there was anything else in it for sale. The peddler opened the drawer and showed them a box containing a black powder and a scroll written in strange characters, which neither the Caliph nor the Mansur could read. "I got these two articles from a merchant who had picked them up in the street at Mecca," said the peddler. "I do not know what they may contain, but as they are of no use to me, you are welcome to have them for a trifle." The Caliph, who liked to have old manuscripts in his library, even though he could not read them, purchased the scroll and the box and dismissed the peddler. Then, being anxious to know what might be the contents of the scroll, he asked the vizier if he did not know of anyone who might be able to decipher it. "Most gracious lord and master," replied the vizier, "near the great mosque lives a man called Selim, the learned, who knows every language under the sun. Send for him. It may be that he will be able to interpret these mysterious characters." The learned Selim was summoned immediately. "Selim," said the Caliph, "I hear you are a scholar. Look well at this scroll and see whether you can read it. If you can, I will give you a robe of honor. But if you fail, I will order you to receive 12 strokes on your cheeks, and 25 on the soles of your feet, because you have been falsely called Selim the learned." Selim prostrated himself and said, "Be it according to your will, O master." Then he gazed long at the scroll. Suddenly he exclaimed, "May I die, oh, my lord, if this isn't Latin." "Well," said the Caliph, "if it is Latin, let us hear what it means." So Selim began to translate, "Thou who mayest find this, praise Allah for his mercy. Whoever shall snuff the powder in this box, and at the same time shall pronounce the word Mutabor, can transform himself into any creature he likes, and will understand the language of all animals. When he wishes to resume the human form, he has only to bow 3 times towards the east, and to repeat the same word. Be careful, however, when wearing the shape of some beast or bird, not to laugh, or thou wilt certainly forget the magic word and remain an animal forever." When Selim the learned had read this, the Caliph was delighted. He made the wise man swear not to tell the matter to anyone, gave him a splendid robe, and dismissed him. Then he said to his vizier, "That's what I call a good bargain, Mansur. I am longing for the moment when I can become some animal. Tomorrow morning I shall expect you early. We will go into the country, take some snuff from my box, and then hear what is being said in air, earth, and water. Next morning, Caliph Chassid had barely finished dressing and breakfasting when the Grand Vizier arrived, according to orders, to accompany him in his expedition. The Caliph stuck the snuff box in his girdle, and having desired his servants to remain at home, started off with the Grand Vizier only in attendance. First they walked through the palace gardens, but they looked in vain for some creature which could tempt them to try their magic power. At length the vizier suggested going further onto a pond which lay beyond the town, and where he had often seen a variety of creatures, especially storks, whose grave, dignified appearance and constant chatter had often attracted his attention. The Caliph consented, and they went straight to the pond. As soon as they arrived, they remarked a stork strutting up and down with a stately air, hunting for frogs, and now and then muttering something to itself. At the same time, they saw another stork far above in the sky, flying towards the same spot. "I would wager my beard, most gracious master," said the Grand Vizier, "that these two long legs will have a good chat together. How would it be if we turned ourselves into storks?" "Well said," replied the Caliph. "But first let us remember carefully how we are to become men once more." "True, bow 3 times towards the east, and say Mutabor, and I shall be Caliph, and you my Grand Vizier again. But for heaven's sake don't laugh or we are lost." As the Caliph spoke, he saw the second stork circling round his head, and gradually flying towards the earth. Quickly he drew the box from his girdle, took a good pinch of the snuff, and offered one to Mansur, who also took one, and both cried together Mutabor. Instantly their legs shriveled up and grew thin and red. Their smart yellow slippers turned to clumsy stork's feet, their arms to wings. Their necks began to sprout from between their shoulders, and grew a yard long. Their beards disappeared, and their bodies were covered with feathers. "You've got a fine long bill, Sir Vizier," cried the Caliph, after standing for some time lost in astonishment. "By the beard of the Prophet, I never saw such a thing in all my life." "My very humble thanks," replied the Grand Vizier, as he bent his long neck. "But if I may venture to say so, your Highness is even handsomer as a stork than as a Caliph. But come, if it so pleases you, let us go near our comrades there, and find out whether we really do understand the language of storks." Meantime, the second stork had reached the ground. It first scraped its bill with its claw, stroked down its feathers, and then advanced towards the first stork. The two newly made storks lost no time in drawing near, and to their amazement, overheard the following conversation. "Good morning, Dame Longlegs. You are out early this morning." "Yes, indeed, dear Chatterbill. I am getting myself a morsel of breakfast. May I offer you a joint of lizard or a frog's thigh?" "1,000 thanks, but I have really no appetite this morning. I am here for a very different purpose. I am to dance today before my father's guests, and I have come to the meadow for a little quiet practice." Thereupon the young stork began to move about with the most wonderful steps. The Caliph and Mansur looked on in surprise for some time. But when at last she balanced herself in a picturesque attitude on one leg, and flapped her wings gracefully up and down, they could hold out no longer. A prolonged peal burst from each of their bills, and it was some time before they could recover their composure. The Caliph was the first to collect himself. "That was the best joke," said he, "I've ever seen. It's a pity the stupid creatures were scared away by our laughter, or no doubt they would have sung next." Suddenly, however, the Vizier remembered how strictly they had been warned not to laugh during their transformation. He at once communicated his fears to the Caliph, who exclaimed, "By Mecca and Medina, it would indeed prove but a poor joke if I had to remain a stork for the remainder of my days. Do just try and remember the stupid word, it has slipped my memory. We must bow 3 times eastwards and say moo, moo, moo." They turned to the east, and fell to bowing till their bills touched the ground, but oh, horrorth magic word was quite forgotten. And however often the Caliph bowed, and however touchingly his Vizier cried, "Moo, moo," they could not recall it, and the unhappy Chassid and Mansur remained storks as they were. The two enchanted birds wandered sadly on through the meadows. In their misery, they could not think what to do next. They could not rid themselves of their new forms. There was no use in returning to the town and saying who they were. For who would believe a stork who announced that he was a Caliph? And even if they did believe him, Would the people of Baghdad consent to let a stork rule over them? So they lounged about for several days, supporting themselves on fruits, which, however, they found some difficulty in eating with their long bills. They did not much care to eat frogs or lizards. Their one comfort in their sad plight was the power of flying, and accordingly, they often flew over the roofs of Baghdad to see what was going on there. During the first few days, they noticed signs of much disturbance and distress in the streets, but about the fourth day, as they sat on the roof of the palace, they perceived a splendid procession passing below them along the street. Drums and trumpets sounded. A man in a scarlet mantle, embroidered in gold, sat on a splendidly caparisoned horse, surrounded by richly dressed slaves. Half Baghdad crowded after him, and they all shouted, "Hail, Mirza, the Lord of Baghdad!" The two storks on the palace roof looked at each other, and Caliph Chassid said, "Can you guess now, Grand Vizier, why I have been enchanted? This Mirza is the son of my deadly enemy, the mighty magician Kashnar, who in an evil moment vowed vengeance on me. Still, I will not despair. Come with me, my faithful friend. We will go to the grave of the Prophet, and perhaps at that sacred spot the spell may be loosed." They rose from the palace roof and spread their wings toward Medina. But flying was not quite an easy matter, for the two storks had had but little practice as yet. "Oh, my lord," gasped the vizier after a couple of hours, "I can get on no longer. You really fly too quick for me. Besides, it is nearly evening, and we should do well to find some place in which to spend the night." Chassid listened with favor to his servant's suggestion, and perceiving in the valley beneath them a ruin which seemed to promise shelter, they flew towards it. The building in which they proposed to pass the night had apparently been formerly a castle. Some handsome pillars still stood amongst the heaps of ruins, and several rooms which yet remained in fair preservation gave evidence of former splendor. Chassid and his companion wandered along the passages seeking a dry spot, when suddenly Mansur stood still. "My lord and master," he whispered, "if it were not absurd for a grand vizier, and still more for a stork, to be afraid of ghosts, I should feel quite nervous for someone, or something close by me, has sighed and moaned quite audibly." The Caliph stood still, and distinctly heard a low weeping sound, which seemed to proceed from a human being rather than from any animal. Full of curiosity, he was about to rush towards the spot from whence the sounds of woe came, when the vizier caught him by the wing with his bill, and implored him not to expose himself to fresh and unknown dangers. The Caliph, however, under whose stork's breast a brave heart beat, tore himself away with the loss of a few feathers, and hurried down a dark passage. He saw a door which stood ajar, and through which he distinctly heard sighs, mingled with sobs. He pushed open the door with his bill, but remained on the threshold, astonished at the sight which met his eyes. On the floor of the ruined chamber, which was but scantily lighted by a small barred window, sat a large screech owl. Big tears rolled from its large round eyes, and in a hoarse voice it uttered its complaints through its crooked beak. As soon as it saw the Caliph and his vizier had crept up, meanwhile it gave vent to a joyful cry. It gently wiped the tears from its eyes with its spotted brown wings, and to the great amazement of the two visitors, addressed them in good human Arabic. "Welcome, you storks, you are a good sign of my deliverance. For it was foretold me that a piece of good fortune should befall me through a stork." When the Caliph had recovered from his surprise, he drew up his feet into a graceful position, bent his long neck, and said, "Oh, screech owl, from your words I am led to believe that we see in you a companion in misfortune. But alas, your hope that you may attain your deliverance through us is but a vain one. You will know our helplessness when you have heard our story." The screech owl begged him to relate it, and the Caliph accordingly told him what we already know. When the Caliph had ended, the owl thanked him, and said, "You hear my story, and own that I am no less unfortunate than yourselves. My father is the king of the Indies. I, his only daughter, am named Lusa. That magician Kashnar who enchanted you has been the cause of my misfortunes too. He came one day to my father and demanded my hand for his son Mirza. My father, who is rather hasty, ordered him to be thrown downstairs. The wretch not long after managed to approach me under another form, and one day, when I was in the garden, and asked for some refreshment, he brought me in the disguise of a slavey a draught, which changed me at once to this horrid shape. Whilst I was fainting with terror, he transported me here and cried to me with his awful voice, 'There shall you remain, lonely and hideous, despised even by the brutes, till the end of your days, or till some one of his own free will asks you to be his wife. Thus do I avenge myself on you and your proud father.' Since then, many months have passed away. Sad and lonely do I live, like any hermit within these walls, avoided by the world, and a terror even to animals. The beauties of nature are hidden from me, for I am blind by day. And it is only when the moon sheds her pale light on this spot that the veil falls from my eyes, and I can see." The owl paused, and once more wiped her eyes with her wing, for the recital of her woes had drawn fresh tears from her. The Caliph fell into deep thought on hearing this story of the princess. "If I am not much mistaken," said he, "there is some mysterious connection between our misfortunes. But how to find the key to the riddle is the question." The owl answered, "Oh, my lord, I too feel sure of this, for in my earliest youth a wise woman foretold that a stork would bring me some great happiness, and I think I could tell you how we might save ourselves." The Caliph was much surprised, and asked her what she meant. "The magician who has made us both miserable," said she, "comes once a month to these ruins. Not far from this room is a large hall, where he is in the habit of feasting with his companions. I have often watched them. They tell each other all about their evil deeds, and possibly the magic word which you have forgotten may be mentioned." "Oh, dearest princess," exclaimed the Caliph, "say, when does he come, and where is the hall?" The owl paused a moment, and then said, "Do not think me unkind, but I can only grant your request on one condition." "Speak, speak," cried Chassid, "command. I will gladly do whatever you wish." "Well," replied the owl, "you see, I should like to be free too. But this can only be if one of you will offer me his hand in marriage." The stork seemed rather taken aback by this suggestion, and the Caliph beckoned to his vizier to retire and consult with him. When they were outside the door, the Caliph said, "Grand Vizier, this is a tiresome business. However, you can take her." "Indeed," said the vizier, "so that when I go home, my wife may scratch my eyes out. Besides, I am an old man, and your highness is still young and unmarried, and a far more suitable match for a young and lovely princess." "That's just where it is," sighed the Caliph, whose wings drooped in a dejected manner. "How do you know she is young and lovely?" "I call it buying a pig in a poke." They argued on for some time, but at length, when the Caliph saw plainly that his vizier would rather remain a stork to the end of his days than marry the owl, he determined to fulfill the condition himself. The owl was delighted. She owned that they could not have arrived at a better time, as most probably the magicians would meet that very night. She then proceeded to lead the two storks to the chamber. They passed through a long dark passage, till at length a bright ray of light shone before them through the chinks of a half-ruined wall. When they reached it, the owl advised them to keep very quiet. Through the gap near which they stood, they could with ease survey the whole of the large hall. It was adorned with splendid carved pillars. A number of colored lamps replaced the light of day. In the middle of the hall stood a round table covered with a variety of dishes, and about the table was a divan on which 8 men were seated. In one of these bad men, the two recognized the peddler who had sold the magic powder. The man next him begged him to relate all his latest doings, and amongst them he told the story of the Caliph and his vizier. "And what kind of word did you give them?" asked another old sorcerer. "A very difficult Latin word. It is mutabor." As soon as the storks heard this, they were nearly beside themselves with joy. They ran at such a pace to the door of the ruined castle that the owl could scarcely keep up with them. When they reached it, the Caliph turned to the owl, and said with much feeling, "Deliverer of my friend and myself, as a proof of my eternal gratitude, accept me as your husband." Then he turned towards the east. 3 times the storks bowed their long necks to the sun, which was just rising over the mountains. "Mutabor," they both cried, and in an instant they were once more transformed. In the rapture of their newly given lives, master and servant fell laughing and weeping into each other's arms. Who shall describe their surprise when they at last turned round and beheld standing before them a beautiful lady, exquisitely dressed. With a smile she held out her hand to the Caliph, and asked, "Do you not recognize your screech owl?" It was she. The Caliph was so enchanted by her grace and beauty that he declared being turned into a stork had been the best piece of luck which had ever befallen him. The three set out at once for Baghdad. Fortunately, the Caliph found not only the box with the magic powder, but also his purse and his girdle. He was therefore able to buy in the nearest village all they required for their journey, and so at last they reached the gates of Baghdad. Here the Caliph's arrival created the greatest sensation. He had been quite given up for dead, and the people were greatly rejoiced to see their beloved ruler again. Their rage with the usurper Mirza, however, was great in proportion. They marched in force to the palace and took the old magician and his son prisoners. The Caliph sent the magician to the room where the princess had lived as an owl, and there had him hanged. As the son, however, knew nothing of his father's acts, the Caliph gave him his choice between death and a pinch of the magic snuff. When he chose the latter, the Grand Vizier handed him the box. One good pinch, and the magic word transformed him to a stork. The Caliph ordered him to be confined in an iron cage and placed in the palace gardens. Caliph Chasid lived long and happily with his wife, the princess. His merriest time was when the Grand Vizier visited him in the afternoon. And when the Caliph was in particularly high spirits, he would condescend to mimic the Vizier's appearance when he was a stork. He would strut gravely, and with well-stiffened legs, up and down the room, chattering and showing how he had vainly bowed to the east, and cried moo, moo. The Caliphess and her children were always much entertained by this performance. But when the Caliph went on nodding and bowing, and calling moo, moo, too long, the Vizier would threaten laughingly to tell the Caliphess the subject of the discussion. Carried on one night outside the door of Princess Screech Owl. The end. The Golden Blackbird. Once upon a time, there was a great lord who had 3 sons. He fell very ill, sent for doctors of every kind, even bone setters. But they, none of them, could find out what was the matter with him, or even give him any relief. At last there came a foreign doctor, who declared that the Golden Blackbird alone could cure the sick man. So the old lord dispatched his eldest son to look for the wonderful bird, and promised him great riches if he managed to find it and bring it back. The young man began his journey, and soon arrived at a place where 4 roads met. He did not know which to choose, and tossed his cap in the air, determining that the direction of its fall should decide him. After traveling for 2 or 3 days, he grew tired of walking without knowing where or for how long. And he stopped at an inn which was filled with merrymakers, and ordered something to eat and drink. "My faith," said he, "it is sheer folly to waste more time hunting for this bird. My father is old, and if he dies I shall inherit his goods." The old man, after waiting patiently for some time, sent his second son to seek the Golden Blackbird. The youth took the same direction as his brother, and when he came to the crossroads, he too tossed up which road he should take. The cap fell in the same place as before, and he walked on till he came to the spot where his brother had halted. The latter, who was leaning out of the window of the inn, called to him to stay where he was and amuse himself. "You are right," replied the youth. "Who knows if I should ever find the Golden Blackbird, even if I sought the whole world through for it? At the worst, if the old man dies, we shall have his property." He entered the inn, and the 2 brothers made merry and feasted, till very soon their money was all spent. They even owed something to their landlord, who kept them as hostages till they could pay their debts. The youngest son set forth in his turn, and he arrived at the place where his brothers were still prisoners. They called to him to stop, and did all they could to prevent his going further. "No," he replied, "my father trusted me, and I will go all over the world till I find the Golden Blackbird." "Bah," said his brothers, "you will never succeed any better than we did. Let him die if he wants to. We will divide the property." As he went his way, he met a little hare, who stopped to look at him, and asked, "Where are you going, my friend?" "I really don't quite know," answered he. "My father is ill, and he cannot be cured unless I bring him back the Golden Blackbird. It is a long time since I set out, but no one can tell me where to find it." "Ah," said the hare, "you have a long way to go yet. You will have to walk at least 700 miles before you get to it. And how am I to travel such a distance?" "Mount on my back," said the little hare, "and I will conduct you." The young man obeyed, At each bound, the little hare went 7 miles. And it was not long before they reached a castle that was as large and beautiful as a castle could be. "The Golden Blackbird is in a little cabin nearby," said the little hare, "and you will easily find it. It lives in a little cage, with another cage beside it, made all of gold. But whatever you do, be sure not to put it in the beautiful cage, or everybody in the castle will know that you have stolen it." The youth found the Golden Blackbird standing on a wooden perch, but as stiff and rigid as if he was dead. And beside the beautiful cage was the cage of gold. "Perhaps he would revive if I were to put him in that lovely cage," thought the youth. The moment that Golden Bird had touched the bars of the splendid cage, he awoke and began to whistle, so that all the servants of the castle ran to see what was the matter, saying that he was a thief and must be put in prison. "No," he answered, "I am not a thief. If I have taken the Golden Blackbird, it is only that it may cure my father, who is ill. And I have traveled more than 700 miles in order to find it." "Well," they replied, "we will let you go, and will even give you the Golden Bird if you are able to bring us the porcelain maiden." The youth departed, weeping, and met the little hare, who was munching wild thyme. "What are you crying for, my friend?" asked the hare. "It is because," he answered, "the castle people will not allow me to carry off the Golden Blackbird without giving them the porcelain maiden in exchange." "You have not followed my advice," said the little hare, "and you have put the Golden Bird into the fine cage." "Alas, yes. Don't despair. The porcelain maiden is a young girl, beautiful as Venus, who dwells 200 miles from here. Jump on my back and I will take you there." The little hare, who took 7 miles in a stride, was there in no time at all, and he stopped on the borders of a lake. "The porcelain maiden," said the hare to the youth, "will come here to bathe with her friends, while I just eat a mouthful of thyme to refresh me. When she is in the lake, be sure you hide her clothes, which are of dazzling whiteness, and do not give them back to her unless she consents to follow you." The little hare left him, and almost immediately the porcelain maiden arrived with her friends. She undressed herself and got into the water. Then the young man glided up noiselessly and laid hold of her clothes, which he hid under a rock at some distance. When the porcelain maiden was tired of playing in the water, she came out to dress herself, but though she hunted for her clothes high and low, she could find them nowhere. Her friends helped her in the search, but seeing at last that it was of no use, they left her, alone on the bank, weeping bitterly. "Why do you cry?" said the young man, approaching her. "Alas," answered she, "while I was bathing someone stole my clothes, and my friends have abandoned me. I will find your clothes if you will only come with me." And the porcelain maiden agreed to follow him, and after having given up her clothes, the young man bought a small horse for her, which went like the wind. The little hare brought them both back to seek for the Golden Blackbird. And when they drew near to the castle where it lived, the little hare said to the young man, "Now, do be a little sharper than you were before, and you will manage to carry off both the Golden Blackbird and the porcelain maiden. Take the golden cage in one hand, and leave the bird in the old cage where he is, and bring that away too." The little hare then vanished. The youth did as he was bid, and the castle servants never noticed that he was carrying off the golden bird. When he reached the inn where his brothers were detained, he delivered them by paying their debt. They set out all together, but as the 2 elder brothers were jealous of the success of the youngest, they took the opportunity, as they were passing by the shores of a lake, to throw themselves upon him, seize the golden bird, and fling him in the water. Then they continued their journey, taking with them the porcelain maiden, in the firm belief that their brother was drowned. But happily, he had snatched and falling at a tuft of rushes, and called loudly for help. The little hare came running to him, and said, "Take hold of my leg and pull yourself out of the water." When he was safe on shore, the little hare said to him, "Know this is what you have to do. Dress yourself like a breton seeking a place as stable boy, and go and offer your services to your father. Once there, you will easily be able to make him understand the truth." The young man did as the little hare bade him, and he went to his father's castle, and inquired if they were not in want of a stable boy. "Yes," replied his father, "very much indeed. But it is not an easy place. There is a little horse in the stable which will not let anyone go near it, and it has already kicked to death several people who have tried to groom it." "I will undertake to groom it," said the youth. I never saw the horse I was afraid of yet. The little horse allowed itself to be rubbed down without a toss of its head and without a kick. Good gracious, exclaimed the master, how is it that he lets you touch him when no one else can go near him? Perhaps he knows me, answered the stable boy. 2 or 3 days later the master said to him, the porcelain maiden is here, but though she is as lovely as the dawn, she is so wicked that she scratches everyone that approaches her. Try if she will accept your services. When the youth entered the room where she was, the Golden Blackbird broke forth into a joyful song, and the porcelain maiden sang too, and jumped for joy. Good gracious, cried the master, the porcelain maiden and the Golden Blackbird know you too? Yes, replied the youth, and the porcelain maiden can tell you the whole truth, if she only will. Then she told all that had happened, and how she had consented to follow the young man who had captured the Golden Blackbird. Yes, added the youth, I delivered my brothers, who were kept prisoners in an inn, and as a reward, they threw me into a lake. So I disguised myself and came here, in order to prove the truth to you. So the old lord embraced his son, and promised that he should inherit all his possessions. And he put to death the 2 elder ones, who had deceived him and had tried to slay their own brother. The young man married the porcelain maiden, and had a splendid wedding feast. The end. The Magic Swan. There were once upon a time 3 brothers, of whom the eldest was called Jacob, the second Frederick, and the youngest Peter. This youngest brother was made a regular butt of by the other 2, and they treated him shamefully. If anything went wrong with their affairs, Peter had to bear the blame and put things right for them. And he had to endure all this ill treatment because he was weak and delicate and couldn't defend himself against his stronger brothers. The poor creature had a most trying life of it in every way, and day and night he pondered how he could make it better. One day, when he was in the wood gathering sticks and crying bitterly, a little old woman came up to him and asked him what was the matter. And he told her all his troubles. Come, my good youth, said the old dame, when he had finished his tale of woe, isn't the world wide enough? Why don't you set out and try your fortune somewhere else? Peter took her words to heart, and left his father's house early one morning, to try his fortune in the wide world, as the old woman had advised him. But he felt very bitterly parting from the home where he had been born, and where he had at least passed a short but happy childhood. And sitting down on a hill, he gazed once more fondly on his native place. Suddenly the little old woman stood before him, and tapping him on the shoulder, said, So far good, my boy. But what do you mean to do now? Peter was at a loss what to answer, for so far he had always thought that fortune would drop into his mouth like a ripe cherry. The old woman, who guessed his thoughts, laughed kindly, and said, I'll tell you what you must do, for I've taken a fancy to you. And I'm sure you won't forget me when you've made your fortune. Peter promised faithfully he wouldn't, and the old woman continued, This evening, at sunset go to yonder pear tree, which you see growing at the crossroads. Underneath it you will find a man lying asleep, and a beautiful large swan will be fastened to the tree close to him. You must be careful not to waken the man, but you must unfasten the swan and take it away with you. You will find that everyone will fall in love with its beautiful plumage, and you must allow anyone who likes to pull out a feather. But as soon as the swan feels as much as a finger on it, it will scream out, and then you must say, Swan, hold fast. Then the hand of the person who has touched the bird will be held as in a vice, and nothing will set it free, unless you touch it with this little stick, which I will make you a present of. When you have captured a whole lot of people in this way, lead your train straight on with you. You will come to a big town where a princess lives who has never been known to laugh. If you can only make her laugh, your fortune is made. Then I beg you won't forget your old friend. Peter promised again that he wouldn't, and at sunset he went to the tree the old woman had mentioned. The man lay there fast asleep, and a large beautiful swan was fastened to the tree beside him by a red cord. Peter loosed the bird, and led it away with him without disturbing the bird's master. He walked on with the swan for some time, and came at last to a building yard where some men were busily at work. They were all lost in admiration of the bird's beautiful plumage, and one forward youth, who was covered with clay from head to foot, called out, Oh, if I'd only one of those feathers, how happy I should be. Pull one out then, said Peter kindly, and the youth seized one from the bird's tail. Instantly the swan screamed, and Peter called out, "Swan, hold fast, and do what he could." The poor youth couldn't get his hand away. The more he hauled, the more the others laughed, till a girl who had been washing clothes in the neighboring stream hurried up to see what was the matter. When she saw the poor boy fastened to the swan, she felt so sorry for him that she stretched out her hand to free him. The bird screamed. "Swan, hold fast," called out Peter, and the girl was caught also. When Peter had gone on for a bit with his captives, they met a chimney sweep, who laughed loudly over the extraordinary troupe and asked the girl what she was doing. "Oh, dearest John," replied the girl, "give me your hand and set me free from this cursed young man." "Most certainly I will, if that's all you want," replied the sweep, and gave the girl his hand. The bird screamed. "Swan, hold fast," said Peter, and the black man was added to their number. They soon came to a village where a fair was being held. A traveling circus was giving a performance, and the clown was just doing his tricks. He opened his eyes wide with amazement when he saw the remarkable trio fastened onto the swan's tail. "Have you gone raving mad, Blackie?" he asked as well as he could for laughing. "It's no laughing matter," the sweep replied. "This wench has got so tight hold of me that I feel as if I were glued to her. Do set me free, like a good clown, and I'll do you a good turn someday." Without a moment's hesitation, the clown grasped the black outstretched hand. The bird screamed. "Swan, hold fast," called out Peter, and the clown became the fourth of the party. Now in the front row of the spectators sat the respected and popular mayor of the village, who was much put out by what he considered nothing but a foolish trick. So much annoyed was he that he seized the clown by the hand and tried to tear him away in order to hand him over to the police. Then the bird screamed, and Peter called out, "Swan, hold fast," and the dignified mayor shared the fate of his predecessors. The mayoress, a long, thin stick of a woman, enraged at the insult done to her husband, seized his free arm and tore at it with all her might, with the only result that she too was forced to swell the procession. After this, no one else had any wish to join them. Soon Peter saw the towers of the capital in front of him. Just before entering it, a glittering carriage came out to meet him, in which was seated a young lady, as beautiful as the day, but with a very solemn and serious expression. But no sooner had she perceived the motley crowd fastened to the swan's tail than she burst into a loud fit of laughter, in which she was joined by all her servants and ladies in waiting. "The princess has laughed at last," they all cried with joy. She stepped out of her carriage to look more closely at the wonderful sight, and laughed again over the capers the poor captives cut. She ordered her carriage to be turned round and drove slowly back into the town, never taking her eyes off Peter and his procession. When the king heard the news that his daughter had actually laughed, he was more than delighted, and had Peter and his marvelous train brought before him. He laughed himself when he saw them, till the tears rolled down his cheeks. "My good friend," he said to Peter, "do you know what I promised the person who succeeded in making the princess laugh?" "No, I don't," said Peter. "Then, I'll tell you," answered the king. 1,000 gold crowns or a piece of land. Which will you choose?" Peter decided in favor of the land. Then he touched the youth, the girl, the sweep, the clown, the mayor, and the mayoress, with his little stick. And they were all free again, and ran away home as if a fire were burning behind them. And their flight, as you may imagine, gave rise to renewed merriment. Then the princess felt moved to stroke the swan, at the same time admiring its plumage. The bird screamed. "Swan, hold fast," called out Peter, and so he won the princess for his bride. But the swan flew up into the air, and vanished in the blue horizon. Peter now received a duchy as a present, and became a very great man indeed. But he did not forget the little old woman who had been the cause of all his good fortune, and appointed her as head housekeeper to him and his royal bride in their magnificent castle. The Yellow Bird. Once upon a time, a fairy who had somehow or other got into mischief was condemned by the High Court of Fairyland to live for several years under the form of some creature, and at the moment of resuming her natural appearance once again to make the fortune of two men. It was left to her to choose what form she would take, and because she loved yellow, she transformed herself into a lovely bird with shining golden feathers, such as no one had ever seen before. When the time of her punishment was at an end, the beautiful yellow bird flew to Baghdad and let herself be caught by a fowler at the precise moment when Badi al-Zaman was walking up and down outside his magnificent summer palace. This Badi al-Zaman's name means wonder of the world, was looked upon in Baghdad as the most fortunate creature under the sun because of his vast wealth. But really, what with anxiety about his riches and being weary of everything, and always desiring something he had not, he never knew a moment's real happiness. Even now, he had come out of his palace, which was large and splendid enough for 50 kings, weary and cross, because he could find nothing new to amuse him. The fowler thought that this would be a favorable opportunity for offering him the marvelous bird, which he felt certain he would buy the instant he saw it. And he was not mistaken, for when Badi al-Zaman took the lovely prisoner into his own hands, he saw written under its right wing the words, "He who eats my head will become a king," and under its left wing, "He who eats my heart will find 100 gold pieces under his pillow every morning." In spite of all his wealth, he at once began to desire the promised gold, and the bargain was soon completed. Then the difficulty arose as to how the bird was to be cooked. For among all his army of servants, not one could Badi al-Zaman trust. At last he asked the fowler if he were married, and on hearing that he was, he bade him take the bird home with him and tell his wife to cook it. "Perhaps," said he, "this will give me an appetite, which I have not had for many a long day. And if so, your wife shall have 100 pieces of silver." The fowler with great joy ran home to his wife, who speedily made a savory stew of the yellow bird. But when Badi al-Zaman reached the cottage and began eagerly to search in the dish for its head and its heart, he could not find either of them, and turned to the fowler's wife in a furious rage. She was so terrified that she fell upon her knees before him and confessed that her 2 children had come in just before he arrived, and had so teased her for some of the dish she was preparing that she had presently given the head to one, and the heart to the other, since these morsels are not generally much esteemed. And Badi al-Zaman rushed from the cottage, vowing vengeance against the whole family. The wrath of a rich man is generally to be feared, so the fowler and his wife resolved to send their children out of harm's way. But the wife, to console her husband, confided to him that she had purposely given them the head and heart of the bird, because she had been able to read what was written under its wings. So, believing that their children's fortunes were made, they embraced them and sent them forth, bidding them get as far away as possible, to take different roads, and to send news of their welfare. For themselves, they remained hidden and disguised in the town, which was really rather clever of them. But very soon afterwards, Badi al-Zaman died of vexation and annoyance at the loss of the promised treasure. And then they went back to their cottage to wait for news of their children. The younger, who had eaten the heart of the yellow bird, very soon found out what it had done for him. For each morning when he awoke, he found a purse containing 100 gold pieces under his pillow. But as all poor people may remember, for their consolation, nothing in the world causes so much trouble or requires so much care as a great treasure. Consequently, the fowler's son, who spent with reckless profusion, and was supposed to be possessed of a great hoard of gold, was before very long attacked by robbers, and in trying to defend himself was so badly wounded that he died. The elder brother, who had eaten the yellow bird's head, traveled a long way without meeting with any particular adventure, until at last he reached a large city in Asia, which was all in an uproar over the choosing of a new emir. All the principal citizens had formed themselves into 2 parties, and it was not until after a prolonged squabble that they agreed that the person to whom the most singular thing happened should be emir. Our young traveler entered the town at this juncture, with his agreeable face and jaunty air, and all at once felt something alight upon his head, which proved to be a snow-white pigeon. Thereupon all the people began to stare, and to run after him, so that he presently reached the palace with the pigeon upon his head, and all the inhabitants of the city at his heels. And before he knew where he was, they made him emir, to his great astonishment, as there is nothing more agreeable than to command, and nothing to which people get accustomed more quickly. The young emir soon felt quite at his ease in his new position. But this did not prevent him from making every kind of mistake, and so misgoverning the kingdom that at last the whole city rose in revolt. and deprived him at once of his authority and his liffey a punishment which he richly deserved. For in the days of his prosperity, he disowned the fowler and his wife, and allowed them to die in poverty. I have told you this story, my dear Sylvain and Yokosa, added the fairy, to prove to you that this little cottage and all that belongs to it is a gift more likely to bring you happiness and contentment than many things that would at first seem grander and more desirable. If you will faithfully promise me to till your fields and feed your flocks, and will keep your word better than you did before, I will see that you never lack anything that is really for your good. Sylvain and Yokosa gave their faithful promise, and as they kept it, they always enjoyed peace and prosperity. The fairy had asked all their friends and neighbors to their wedding, which took place at once with great festivities and rejoicings. And they lived to a good old age, always loving one another with all their hearts.